Hi everybody, thank you very much for having me at the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. I feel very honoured to be here and sharing my work with you amongst so many other illustrious authors. I hope you enjoy my reading today. My name is Faith. I write as FD Lee and I write fantasy and science fiction. I've got a little display here behind me of my books. Which you can get at everywhere you would assume online. Because it's the Fantasy Club, I've decided to read a little bit from The Fairy's Tale, which is the first book in my fantasy series. Just I suppose to give a little bit of background to the story before I dive in. I wrote this book because I was very annoyed with the story Cinderella. In fact, it always just, I don't know, I hated it as a pantomime as a child. And then as I grew older and became a bit more critical, I began to be very suspicious of the tropes in a lot of fantasy and in a lot of particularly medieval romance and fairy tale fantasy. Particularly the tropes surrounding kind of gender and gendered characters. And so I did what I think any normal human being would do when they find something that annoys them. I decided to write an ongoing fantasy series and do a PhD in the subject. So yeah, very rational response from me to finding things I didn't like. So that's kind of where this story kind of came from intellectually for me. The story itself follows, initially follows, as it gets bigger obviously as it goes on, but initially follows Bee, Buttercup Snowblossom, and she is a cabbage fairy, but she desperately wants to become a fiction management executive. She wants to become a fairy godmother. The problem that she faces is that being a cabbage fairy, she has very, very low status in Fae society. So in the world that I've created, the Fae society functions based on the generation of belief. So they tell fairy stories to generate belief, which is what allows them to survive in their city. Bee, being a fairy, is felt to not be very good for generating belief because the characters, the human beings with characters, the characters stop believing in fairies pretty quickly. So the fairies, as a result, aren't very highly regarded in their society. Bee, however, is determined to prove them wrong, determined to show that fairies can manage a plot and they can generate belief and they can create stories. Through various kind of plot moments in the early chapters of the book, she's given an opportunity to tell what is supposed to be a simple happy ever after story, a simple true love story. She has 1 week to complete it. I'm going to pick up the book from chapter 7. I'm going to begin reading from chapter 7. So at this point, Bee has been given this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as a fairy, no less, to show what she can do, that she can manage a plot. And we're going to pick it up from the moment when her characters are supposed to be meeting each other. This is the first introduction, and that's where we're going to dive in. So hopefully that gives you enough background to kind of understand what's going on. One day, as the fair maiden walked through the forest, she was chanced upon by a tall, handsome stranger. He rode a white stallion, the dappled sunlight catching in his hair. The maid gazed into his clear blue eyes and realized she had never before seen such a man. It was love at first sight. Or, at least, that was what was supposed to happen. What actually happened was this. Bee, from her vantage point, saw the handsome king ride ever closer to the glade in which Cindy so charmingly stood, his stallion prancing beneath him. He looked magnificent. Bee smiled. She'd always known she could do this. She didn't know why she'd been so nervous. In just a few moments the king would burst forth and see Cindy looking beautiful. They'd walk a spell, trip the trap Bee had laid. He'd save her in a dashing fashion, and they'd fall in love. Bee covered her mouth to stop herself squealing in excitement. Everything was going perfectly. And then it all went wrong. "My lord," called a voice from somewhere behind the king. It was a voice more musical than even the most talented elf, softer than the most seductive adhene, more convincing than the most persuasive imp. The trouble was not the voice. The trouble was what it said. "We appear to be headed in the wrong direction. The camp is far east of here." Bee watched helplessly as the king pulled up his horse and turned back the way he'd come, away from Cindy and his destiny. Cindy finished picking her flowers, took her bag and walked off in the opposite direction back to her house. Bee swore. She didn't know what to do, but she had to do something. She watched Cindy disappearing into the forest and made a choice. She swept up her bag and ran after the king. She had no idea what she would do when she reached him, but she'd cross that bridge when she came to it. The most important thing right now was to get the introduction back on plot. And, she added, to find out who had ruined it in the first place. It didn't take Bee long to catch up with her hero. He was sitting astride his horse, talking to a tall, broad-shouldered man who was holding a map and wearing a hood that completely obscured his face. She ducked behind a tree and listened. "Look here, old bean. The map clearly states the damnable thing is here," the king said, leaning over his horse's neck to indicate a point on the map. "Indeed, sire, you are correct. We, however, are here," the hooded man said patiently. "What's that? We can't be there, S. We left the castle out of the north gate. We're here, blast it." Bee bit her lip. Her whole plot was being jeopardized because neither one of them could read a map. It wasn't so horrendous she'd laugh. "Sire," the hood sighed, "I assure you we are moving in the wrong direction. Her house is about a mile in that direction. But if we are here, the encampment must surely be there." Bee continued her attack on her lower lip. Things were going really wrong now. She should go straight back to the Gen Am and report everything that had happened to Miss Dastinen. It would be all right, and he'd give her a new plot to work on, surely. The Gen Am needed stories running. She should do the right thing. But he might not give her another plot. If the stories were so desperately needed, maybe he wouldn't risk her fouling up another one. Especially if she couldn't get the introduction right. The introduction, for mortal God's sake. It practically told itself. She could fix it. No one would ever know. No matter what. That's what Miss Dastinen had said. Bee stepped out from behind the tree. Hello? The two men looked up. Bee managed to smile. It was absolutely imperative to the plot that she, as the godmother, didn't meet the king. She needed to play this very carefully. What? You all right there, gel?" Bee's smile froze. It suddenly occurred to her she had no idea how to talk to the characters. Mary, I wish ye good morrow, Lorks? The two men stared. "Ah, well, good morrow to you too," the king said. "I have cometh to this place here, here, to make merry." "Oh," Bee faltered as her brain pointed out that her mouth had just said "make merry." Make merry, that is, with the tidings. Yes, merry tidings. I am that didn't sound right. To guide you, for I am a humble woodcutter, going about my humble woodcutting in these humble woods. That was better. The king smiled at her. The other man, the one in the hood, cocked his head in a way that made Bee feel relieved she couldn't see his face. For some reason, she had the feeling his expression, hidden behind his cowl, was not a friendly one. "Gosh, well, that's a bit of luck. Me and my advice—" "John," the hooded man said, a note of warning in his voice. "Oh, yes, right here. Nearly had cats everywhere there. My friend and I appear to have got turned around. You don't know where the traitors' camp is, do you?" Out of the corner of her eye, Bee saw the hooded man drop his face into his hand. "The traitors' camp?" she asked, and then, remembering herself, added, "Oodalally." "Oh, right. No, sorry. I meant the rebels' camp. Yes, good old rebels, what? Voice of the people, etc." Bee, a person for whom the phrase impulsive was too well thought out, was tempted to ask what he meant, but she was too preoccupied with her plot. "Yay, yes. There's a house just down that way, I faith. You could ask there. That's what I'd do if I were lost. Ask at a nearby house. Marry." She'd better get the hero and the heroine together quickly. She was running out of words. The king turned to the hooded man, who was standing with his arms folded. "What say you, S?" "Had you not intended your visit to be conducted with the minimal amount of notice possible?" he replied. "It's troublesome enough to have met with this woodcutter." "Oh, it's only just a little way," Bee said, noting the way the hooded man said woodcutter and not liking it one bit. "I know of the maiden who liveth thereth. She's verily, verily pretty, and she can sing and cook. You're bound to like her." "Well, that's spiffing," John said. Clearly not up to speed on my singing and cooking made her better able to give him directions. "Now, S, I don't see what harm it'll do to find this cottage and sort this whole mess out. I am the key, that is, I am the one with the map, and so I think it's down to me to call the shots." The hooded man stood silent. Bee held her breath. And then he nodded. "Jolly good," John smiled. "Lead the way then, miss." Bee couldn't believe it. She'd done it. And they all said fairies couldn't do anything more important than tidy houses or pick teeth. Well, this just showed them. "Madam, if it verily please you," the hooded man said, picking up the reins of his horse and leading it by hand. Oh, yes, sorry." Bee started towards Cindy's house. The hooded man walked next to her, keeping a distance between her and the king. Bee found herself wondering if he wasn't some kind of bodyguard. There was something about the way he moved that seemed to suggest he was wary of her, like he thought she was suddenly going to assassinate her hero. Well, when he saw that she was leading the king to his rightful destiny, he'd have to swallow his words, though he hadn't actually said very much to her. He was certainly thinking some pretty unkind things, if his body language was any clue. She supposed she shouldn't let it upset her. She only wished that, just once, someone might not instantly assume she didn't know what she was doing. "I suspect you know very well what you are doing. Therein lies the problem," the hooded man said. "'Scuse me?" The hood snorted and then muttered something in a language Bee didn't recognise. "Oh yes, very brave. Why not say it so I can understand it?" Bee snapped, forgetting her role as humble woodcutter. The hood turned to face her. "Happily. A scream filled the forest. "Mortal gods!" Bee cried, breaking into a run. "The bear!" "The bear?" the hooded man said. But Bee was already running ahead, her feet pounding against the leafy carpet of the forest. She'd forgotten about the bear she'd set up to frighten Cindy, the one that John was supposed to save her from, the one which she'd secured with a rope and a clockwork release, the trigger of which Cindy must have stepped on. The very same bear she'd decided to use because she didn't want to get in a troll and risk sharing her success. Another scream rang out. Tears stung Bee's eyes as she ran. She hurtled through the forest, the trees blocking her like prison bars, causing her to slide and stumble. The ground began to climb and Bee to slow. She wasn't going to make it in time. And then suddenly John was overtaking her, his stallion churning up the ground as it galloped. Bee pushed forward as another scream filled the forest and then abruptly cut off. Still running, she grabbed a large, heavy stick and charged over the brow of the hill. John was on his horse, his sword half out of its scabbard, about to face down the bear, Cindy on the ground next to him. The bear was standing on its hind legs, its great paws ready to swipe, its claws long and sharp. John's horse, panicked, was mid-buck. There was no way he would be able to keep his seat, not with his right hand freeing his sword and his left to hold the reins. The characters didn't stand a chance against the creature. Except they were all frozen, mid-action, like statues. Dum dum dum! What happens next? So that's a little bit from my book. As I say, The Fairy's Tale by F.D. Lee, available everywhere online in various formats. But if you would like to read an e-copy for free, just go to my website www.fdlee.co.uk and you can find the information about how to get your free copy there. It's been an absolute thrill being invited to read for you guys. Thank you so much for having me on your computers or phones or in your homes. I do hope lockdown is going well for everyone. I hope you're keeping safe and that the general environment at the moment isn't wearing you down too much. I wish you good health and happiness, and hopefully I might see you at some point, maybe at an event when the world opens again. Thank you so much for your time. Bye!